The text came through at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was from Sasha, an acquaintance from a photography course I'd taken 2 years ago. Hey, remember me? Total emergency. My roommate is a psycho. I have to be out tomorrow. I have nowhere to go. You still have that cute apartment in the Heights, right? Any chance I could crash for like a month? I'll pay you. You'd be saving my life. I was half asleep, feeling charitable. I typed back, of course. Don't worry about money. Just get yourself safe. That was my first mistake. My second was giving her the key. I didn't know I wasn't offering a couch. I was handing over my entire life. My apartment was my sanctuary. A one-bedroom in a slightly shabby but charming pre-war building in the Heights. I'd lived there for 3 years, painstakingly decorating it with thrift store finds and my own photography. It was my first real adult space, a testament to surviving my early 20s in the city. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, which meant my income was unpredictable, but my time was my own. I valued my privacy, my quiet. Sasha had always been more of a social media friend than a real one. We'd bonded briefly over aperture settings and bad workshop wine, followed each other online, and that was it. Her Instagram was a curated highlight reel of art openings, beach trips, and #good vibes. She seemed fun, flighty, harmless. When her roommate emergency hit, it fit the narrative. A dramatic, chaotic girl in a temporary pinch. She arrived the next evening with 2 massive suitcases and a bright, teary smile. I cannot thank you enough, Maya. You are literally an angel. She insisted on giving me $200 in cash, which I tried to refuse, but she stuffed it in my junk drawer. For utilities. I insist. It felt genuine. She was the perfect, grateful guest for the first week. She'd buy groceries, clean up after herself, be gone for days at a time on shoots. I started to feel good about helping. The trouble started subtly. I'd come home to find my things rearranged. A vase moved to a different shelf. My favorite throw blanket folded in a way I never folded it. My coffee was running out twice as fast. I'd mention it lightly. Hey, no worries, but if you use the last of the coffee, just add it to the list on the fridge. She'd apologize profusely, promise to replace it, and then do the same thing 2 days later. Then came the borrowing. First, it was a sweater. Then my good leather jacket. Then my camera lens. I have this spontaneous sunset shoot. Mine is cracked. I'll bring it back tonight, promise. She'd return things late, or with a tiny new scratch. The boundaries were being eroded, one polite request at a time. The real turning point was 2 weeks in. I was heading upstate for a 4-day freelance job, shooting a small boutique hotel. It was a good gig. I mentioned it to Sasha, casually. Her eyes lit up. 4 days of peace and quiet for me to get my life sorted. Perfect. Have fun. When I returned, exhausted but happy, my key didn't work. I stood in the dim hallway of my own building, staring at the lock. A shiny new deadbolt stared back at me, one I didn't buy, one I didn't install. My stomach dropped. I knocked. No answer. I called Sasha's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hey, I'm back. My key isn't working? What's up with the lock?" An hour later, as I sat on the hallway floor charging my dying phone, her reply came through. "New lock for safety. So many creeps in this building. Don't worry, I have a key for you. I'm out of town for a couple days. I'll leave it with the super when I'm back. Zoxo." The super, Mr. Gaffney, was a 70-year-old man who barely spoke English and whose office hours were never. A cold, hard certainty began to form in my gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. Panic is a cold fire. It starts in your chest and spreads out to your fingertips, making them numb and clumsy. I forced myself to breathe. Think, Maya. Think. First, I called the super's number from the peeling sticker in the lobby. No answer. I banged on his basement apartment door until a neighbor stuck their head out and told me he was visiting family in New Jersey for a week. Okay. No super. Next, the police. I dialed 911, but when I explained the situation, a friend staying with me changed the locks while I was away. The dispatcher's tone turned bored. That's a civil matter, ma'am. You need to contact your landlord or go through housing court. We don't handle lockouts between roommates. She's not a roommate. She's a guest. She's stealing my apartment. If she has permission to be there and has established residency, it's a civil matter. You can file a report online for unlawful eviction if you want a paper trail.
Click.
Civil matter. The two most enraging words in the English language when you're locked out of your own home. It meant the system saw this as a contractual dispute, not a crime. She had my permission to be there. She had her belongings there. In the eyes of the law, she was now a tenant, and I was now her landlord. A landlord who had illegally locked out her tenant, me. I was homeless. I had my camera bag, my laptop backpack, and the clothes I'd packed for a 4-day trip. Everything else, my portfolio, my winter coat, my grandmother's jewelry, my bed, was behind that new, shiny deadbolt. I booked the cheapest hotel room I could find, a depressing place near the airport that smelled of mildew and despair. I lay on the stiff bed, my mind racing. I needed to understand what rights she had and what rights I had. I spent the night diving into the city's tenant laws, my laptop glowing in the dark room. Panic is a cold fire. It starts in your chest and spreads out to your fingertips, making them numb and clumsy. I force myself to breathe. Think, Maya.
Think.
First, I called the super's number from the peeling sticker in the lobby. No answer. I banged on his basement apartment door until a neighbor stuck their head out and told me he was visiting family in New Jersey for a week. Okay, no super. Next, the police. I dialed 911, but when I explained the situation, a friend staying with me changed the locks while I was away. The dispatcher's tone turned bored. That's a civil matter, ma'am. You need to contact your landlord or go through housing court. We don't handle lockouts between roommates. She's not a roommate. She's a guest. She's stealing my apartment. If she has permission to be there and has established residency, it's a civil matter. You can file a report online for unlawful eviction if you want a paper trail.
Click.
Civil matter. The two most enraging words in the English language when you're locked out of your own home. It meant the system saw this as a contractual dispute, not a crime. She had my permission to be there. She had her belongings there. In the eyes of the law, she was now a tenant, and I was now her landlord. A landlord who had illegally locked out her tenant, me. I was homeless. I had my camera bag, my laptop backpack, and the clothes I'd packed for a 4-day trip. Everything else, my portfolio, my winter coat, my grandmother's jewelry, my bed, was behind that new, shiny deadbolt. I booked the cheapest hotel room I could find, a depressing place near the airport that smelled of mildew and despair. I lay on the stiff bed, my mind racing. I needed to understand what rights she had and what rights I had. I spent the night diving into the city's tenant laws, my laptop glowing in the dark room. I took the stairs 2 at a time. My apartment door was open a crack, held by the chain lock. Sasha peered through the gap. She was wearing my robe. Hey, she said, not meeting my eyes. Look, about the lock, I can explain. Open the door, Sasha. I don't feel safe with you angry like this. I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You don't feel safe? You're in my home, wearing my robe, behind a lock you installed. Open the door, or I call the police and tell them you've stolen my property and are illegally withholding it. That they might care about. Reluctantly, she unchained the door. I pushed inside. My apartment was different. Her suitcases were exploded open in the living room. My books were shoved to one side of the shelf to make room for her crystals and self-help books. There were dirty dishes in my sink. It felt violated. You need to leave, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage.
Today. Now.
She crossed her arms, the performative vulnerability gone, replaced by a cold, calculating smirk. Or what, Maya? You'll evict me? You know how long that takes? And in the meantime, you're in breach of your lease for having an unauthorized subletter. I looked it up. If you start a fight, we both go down. But I have nowhere to go. You have options. She'd researched. This was premeditated. She was holding my lease over my head as a shield. Give me my key, I demanded. The super has it, she said, picking at her nail. Like I said. We both knew that was a lie. We stood in the middle of my living room in a stalemate. She had the law, and my own lease, twisted into a weapon. I had, what?
Rage.
And a camera in my bag. An idea, dark and nascent, began to form. She thought the battlefield was housing court. She thought the weapons were legal notices. She was wrong. I slung my camera bag over my shoulder and walked to the door. Before I left, I turned. Enjoy the apartment, Sasha. For now. Her smirk faltered, just for a second. I went straight to the copy shop and printed out a formal-looking 30-day notice to quit from a free legal website. I slid it under my door. It was a formality, a piece of theater. It wouldn't get her out, but it started the paper trail I needed. My real plan was taking shape. So, what do you think my first move will be? Go to the landlord? Call her family? Or something else entirely? Let me know your theory in the comments. In part 2, the hunt for leverage begins, and I discover Sasha isn't who she pretended to be.
Subscribe.
The notice to quit was bait. I needed to see how she'd react. Her response wasn't a phone call or a text.
It was an Instagram story.
A boomerang of her sipping wine in my living room, with a caption, "When life gives you lemons, change the locks lemon locked #new beginnings #MySpace." She'd tagged the location, my address. She wasn't hiding.
She was flaunting it.
She'd moved from scammer to conqueror, and she was broadcasting her victory. That post was her second mistake. The first was underestimating me. Now I had a public record of her admission and a digital footprint to follow. Sitting in the library, watching that Instagram story loop, the cold fury solidified into a plan. She wanted a war of paperwork and patience?
Fine.
But I'd open a second front. A digital one. And for that, I needed intelligence. I started with what I knew. Her full name, Sasha Vance. From our old workshop roster, I had her email. I began a deep, methodical dive. Not the casual scrolling of a friend, but the forensic search of a target. Her Instagram was a curated lie, but lies have seams. I combed through over 2,000 posts. I found tagged photos from over a year ago at a different apartment, with different best friends. I found a comment from a girl named Liza. Miss you. When are you coming back to Portland?
Portland.
That was new. I used her email to search across platforms. Found a LinkedIn profile, barely updated, listing her as a freelance creative consultant and brand strategist for a company that, when I Googled it, had a website that was just a landing page.
A shell.
I found an old Pinterest account linked to it, filled with entrepreneur hustle quotes and photos of luxury cars. The most telling find was on a niche forum for digital nomads. A username, #SashVibesOnly, asked for advice 2 years prior about establishing residency quickly in a new city for credit purposes. The responses were about getting a utility bill, a bank statement. Textbook squatter tactics. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. This was a pattern. A lifestyle. She was a professional grifter, moving from city to city, person to person, using sympathy and social grace to gain a foothold, then exploiting tenant laws to live for free until friction, or a better opportunity, pushed her along. Armed with this, I needed more concrete leverage. I needed to find someone she wouldn't want me to contact. I went back to the Portland clue. In one of the older Instagram photos with Liza, there was a visible mailbox in the background with a house number. A long shot. I spent hours cross-referencing that image with street views on Google Maps, using other landmarks from her photos. After a mind-numbing afternoon, I found it. A duplex in Portland. A search of the property records gave me the owner's name, Carol and Robert Vance. Her parents. Bingo.
I now had a name and a city.
A few more searches in public records databases, the kind you pay $30 for, gave me a phone number for Carol Vance. This was the nuclear option. Calling an angry mother could backfire spectacularly. I needed more first. I turned my attention to my own lease and my landlord, a faceless property management company called Metrostone. I reread every line. The clause forbidding subletting was clear. If they found out, they could terminate my lease and charge me fees. Sasha's threat was real. But I realized something. The lease was also my weapon. It required the tenant, me, to maintain the apartment in a lawful manner. Harboring a squatter was not lawful. By not reporting her, I was in violation. I had to get ahead of it. I drafted an email to Metrostone. It was a masterpiece of careful omission and strategic truth. Subject: urgent matter. Unauthorized occupant at my address. Dear management, I am writing to report a serious situation at my apartment. While I was away for a short work trip, an acquaintance I had allowed to stay as a temporary guest has refused to leave and has unlawfully changed the locks on the unit. I have served her with a formal notice to quit and am initiating eviction proceedings. However, as she is now an unauthorized occupant in violation of my lease agreement, I am formally notifying you of the issue and my actions to resolve it. I am committed to complying with all terms of my lease and will provide updates as the legal process moves forward. I framed myself as the responsible tenant proactively dealing with the problem, not the one who caused it. I attached the notice to quit I'd served. I sent it. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Better they hear it from me, in my words, than from a neighbor or, God forbid, from Sasha herself trying to cut a deal. Next, I needed to make Sasha's life inside the apartment less comfortable. Not through confrontation, but through bureaucracy. I logged into my online accounts. I transferred the internet service to a mobile hotspot plan, effective immediately, leaving the apartment Wi-Fi dead. I suspended my Netflix, Hulu, and Spotify premium accounts she'd been mooching off. Small, petty actions, but they were my first acts of reclaiming control. Then I set up a camera. Not inside, that was illegal. I bought a small, discreet battery-powered doorbell camera from an electronics store. Under the cover of night, I installed it on the doorframe opposite my apartment door in the common hallway. It was angled to see anyone coming or going. It connected to an app on my phone. Now, I had eyes. I could see when she left, when she came home, if she brought anyone. For 3 days, I watched. I lived out of my hotel room, my life reduced to a phone screen. I saw her leave every morning around 10, dressed in her aspirational, creative outfits, and return late, often with takeout. She was living my life rent-free, while I was burning through savings. Then, on the 4th day, I saw something interesting. A man in a cheap suit, carrying a clipboard, knocked on my door. Sasha answered. They talked for 10 minutes. He handed her a pamphlet and left. I zoomed in on a frame from the camera. The pamphlet title, Know Your Tenant Rights. It was from a local tenant advocacy group, the kind that sometimes helps legitimate tenants fight slumlords, but also attracts people like Sasha looking to game the system. She was building her own paper trail, positioning herself as the victim of an attempted illegal eviction. She was laying the groundwork to go to housing court and paint me as the predatory, lease-breaking landlord. The battle was escalating. It was time to make my first direct move. I couldn't touch her legally yet, but I could touch her reputation. Using a throwaway email account, I created a simple, clean website on a free builder. 1 page. The title, Sasha Vance, a pattern. On it, I posted a timeline. Not accusations, just facts with screen grabs. The date she asked to stay. The date of the lock change, with a photo from my hallway camera of the new deadbolt. A cropped image of her Instagram story bragging about it. Links to the public records of the Portland address. The username from the Digital Nomad Forum. I presented it as a case study in a common scam, without using inflammatory language. Then I did something mean. I found every person she'd tagged in photos in the last 6 months, the new friends in this city, and I sent them the link anonymously. The message read, Heads up about someone in your circle. Stay safe. I wasn't expecting them to storm the castle. I was sowing doubt, isolating her, cutting off her supply of new friends who might offer the next couch. I was turning her weapon's social connection against her. The effect was immediate. That night, via my hallway camera, I saw her pacing in the hallway, phone to her ear, arguing with someone. Her curated digital world was getting real, unwelcome feedback. She texted me. The tone had changed. No more smirking emojis. What is this website? Are you trying to ruin my life? Take it down. I waited an hour, then replied with one sentence. I want my apartment back. You have 24 hours to leave, or the link goes to Carol Vance in Portland. I had just fired the first shot in the real war. The phone rang 2 minutes later. It was Sasha. Her voice was shrill, stripped of all its performative charm. You contacted my mother? Not yet, I said calmly. The timer starts now. You walk away, leave the key, and I take the site down. You stay, and your mom gets a very detailed link, along with the photos of you in my robe and the police report I'm about to file for theft of my camera lens, which I have the serial number for. It was a bluff about the police report, but she didn't know that. She was silent, breathing heavily. Then she hung up. So what does she do? Does she call my bluff and dig in, or does she panic and run? And what about my landlord, Metrostone? Have they read my email yet? Let me know your predictions in the comments. Part 3 is where the pressure builds, and someone blinks.
Subscribe.
Sasha didn't leave in 24 hours. She called my bluff. But she didn't just stay quiet. She escalated. I got an email from Metrostone Property Management. The subject line, lease violation. Notice TO cure. My heart stopped. They got my email, all right. And they'd done their own investigation. The email stated that harboring an unauthorized occupant constituted a material breach. I had 7 days to cure the violation, meaning remove Sasha, or face lease termination and possible legal action for damages. She hadn't just called my bluff. She'd gone around me and pulled the pin on the grenade I was holding. Now, the clock was ticking for both of us. The Metrostone email was a bucket of ice water. My clever, proactive notification had backfired. Instead of seeing me as a victim, they saw me as a liability. The notice to cure was a formal legal document, CC'd to some corporate lawyer. It made everything real, fast, and terrifyingly expensive. I had to think. Sasha must have contacted them.
How?
Posing as me? Or as a concerned tenant, reporting an illegal sublet. It didn't matter. She'd successfully turned the landlord into her unwitting ally. My threat of exposure to her mother was a distant, personal concern. An eviction on my record was an immediate, existential threat. It would make renting anywhere in this city, maybe any city, nearly impossible. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed a lawyer. Not for later, for right now. I called every legal aid office, every tenant resource line. Wait lists. I couldn't afford a private attorney. I was trapped in the exact scenario Sasha had engineered. Resourceless, desperate, and out of time. Then I remembered the tenant advocacy pamphlet the man had given her. If she could use those resources, so could I. I found the group online, the Urban Tenant Defense Coalition. I called. I explained my situation, flipping the script. I'm the tenant of record. An unauthorized guest has taken over my apartment, changed the locks, and now my landlord is threatening to evict me because of her. I need help. The woman on the phone sounded skeptical but tired. We usually help tenants against landlords, not other tenants. I'm about to be homeless because of this, I said, my voice cracking with genuine strain. She's a professional squatter. She's done this before. There was a pause. What's the name of the unauthorized occupant? Sasha Vance. A longer pause. I heard keyboard clicks. She was here earlier this week. Picked up materials. The woman's tone changed, hardened. We don't appreciate being used as tools for fraud. Come in tomorrow. Bring all your documentation. The lease, the notice from your landlord, everything. It was a thread of hope. I spent the night in the library, compiling a binder. My lease, the Metrostone email, printouts of the notice to quit, screenshots of Sasha's initial pleas and her smug Instagram story, the timeline website I'd made, the hallway camera footage of the lock being changed, which I'd edited to a short clip, and my research on her pattern in Portland. I was building a case. The next morning, I met with a housing advocate at the coalition named Marcus. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He flipped through my binder. "You've done your homework," he grunted. "This is good. This shows premeditation. Landlords hate this stuff more than a messy breakup." It's fraud, and it creates liability for them. He picked up the phone and called Metrostone. He identified himself, quoted the relevant city housing codes that protected bona fide tenants from being penalized for the actions of fraudulent occupants, especially when the tenant had taken immediate steps to rectify the situation. He spoke a language of codes and statutes that my polite email hadn't. He got the notice to cure put on hold, pending a joint investigation by the Coalition and Metrostone's legal team.
He bought me time.
Then he gave me my marching orders. The fastest way out of this isn't through eviction court. It's through making her want to leave. You've started with social pressure.
Good.
Now we add financial and legal pressure. She's comfortable because she thinks the system is slow. We make it feel fast and hot. Plan A, the utility play. Marcus helped me draft a formal letter to the utility companies, informing them that I was disputing all charges incurred from the date of the lock change forward, as I was denied access to the premises and believed the current occupant was committing fraud. I couldn't shut off the electricity or water, that was illegal, but I could start a dispute that would freeze the accounts, requiring a deposit from her to keep them on. Inconvenience. Friction. Plan B, the abatement angle. I filed a formal complaint with the city's housing department, stating that the apartment's locks had been altered without my consent as the tenant of record, creating a security and habitability issue. I requested an inspection. A city inspector knocking on the door, asking her for proof of residency she couldn't provide, would be a nightmare for her. Plan C, the personal pincer. Marcus agreed that contacting her parents was a viable tactic, not as a threat, but as a notification. Fraudsters rely on compartments. They keep their worlds separate. Shatter that. I called Carol Vance in Portland. My hands were sweating. A warm, maternal voice answered. Hello, Mrs. Vance? My name is Maya. I'm calling from New York. I'm afraid I have some concerning news regarding your daughter, Sasha. I was calm, factual, and deeply apologetic. I explained that Sasha had come to me in a crisis, that I'd tried to help, but that the situation had escalated and she was now illegally occupying my apartment, which was putting my housing at risk. I emphasized that I was worried about Sasha's well-being, that this pattern seemed to indicate she needed help. I gave her the link to the Timeline website. I don't want to cause trouble. I just want my home back, and I'm worried she's in over her head. The silence on the other end was long and heavy. Then, a sigh, filled with a world of weariness. Not again. Those two words confirmed everything. She did this to a cousin in Seattle last year. We thought she was getting help. She told us she had a job, an apartment. Carol Vance's voice broke. I'm so sorry. We'll try to reach her. I hung up, feeling a pang of sympathy for this woman, quickly overshadowed by grim satisfaction. The compartment was shattered. The effects were not immediate, but they were seismic. My hallway camera showed Sasha, on the phone later that day, screaming, crying. Not her performative tears, real, ragged sobs of rage and panic. Her fortress of lies was crumbling from the inside. Then the city housing inspector showed up. I watched by the camera as Sasha tried to bluff her way through, showing him her driver's license with the Portland address and some printed bank statements. He asked for a lease. She didn't have one. He left her a bright orange violation notice, taped to my door for unauthorized structural alteration, the lock, and failure to provide proof of legal occupancy. She tore it down, but the visit had shaken her. The system, which she'd always experienced as slow and plodding, was suddenly showing up at her door. Finally, the utility company sent a notice. Service dispute, deposit required. She would have to pay a $300 deposit to keep the lights on, in an apartment she didn't legally occupy. She was being squeezed from all sides, socially isolated, financially pressured, legally harassed, and now, with her family aware, emotionally exposed. The comfortable squat was becoming a stressful siege. She texted me. The message was a masterpiece of spiraling fury and desperation. You psycho bitch. You called my MOM? You're ruining everything. I'm not leaving. I'll take you down with me. I'll tell the landlord you assaulted me. I have photos of bruises. It was a new, Terrifying escalation. False accusations. She was willing to burn it all down. I showed the text to Marcus. His face turned grim. She's cornered. This is the most dangerous phase. She's capable of anything now.
We need to end this fast.
He proposed a final, direct confrontation. Not by me, by a process server. He would help me file an order to show cause in housing court the next morning, alleging fraud and illegal lockout, and request an emergency hearing due to the threat of false police reports. It was a Hail Mary. The court was backed up for months. But the act of serving her with real, stamped court papers might be the final psychological blow. We would do it tomorrow at noon. So, what happens when the process server shows up? Does she finally break and run? Or does she make good on her threat and call the police with a fabricated story first? Let me know what you think her last desperate move will be. Part 4 is the showdown.
Subscribe.
The process server was a woman named Gail, built like a linebacker with a kind smile. She held the thick envelope containing the housing court petition. "You're sure she's home?" she asked me. We were in the coffee shop across from my building, watching my hallway camera feed on my phone. Sasha was pacing inside. "She's home." I confirmed, my mouth dry. Gail nodded. "Wait here. Do not engage." I watched her cross the street, a one-woman judicial system. This was it. Either the weight of the law would crack Sasha's defiance, or she'd ignite the catastrophic counterattack she'd promised. There would be no more warnings. From my phone screen, I watched Gail buzz my apartment. No answer. She buzzed again, holding it down. The camera's audio picked up a faint, angry "what" through the intercom. "Delivery for Sasha Vance," Gail said, her voice neutral and professional. "Leave it downstairs. I need a signature. It's a legal document." Silence. Then the door buzzed. Gail pushed it open and disappeared into the stairwell. My heart hammered against my ribs. The camera view showed only the empty hallway. The next 2 minutes were agony. Then the apartment door flew open. Sasha stood there, hair wild, wearing my favorite sweater. "I'm not accepting that," she shouted, her voice shrill in the echoey hall. "Ma'am, I am required to serve you in person. This is a petition filed in housing court." Gail's voice was calm, a rock in a storm. "It's harassment. She's harassing me. I'm calling the police." Sasha tried to slam the door, but Gail, with practiced ease, slid her foot in the jam. "You can call whoever you like after you accept service. I just need to hand it to you. Take the papers, or I will place them at your feet and note your refusal to accept. The court considers that served." Sasha stared at the envelope like it was a live snake. I could see the calculations flashing behind her eyes. Accepting it made it real, but refusing it wouldn't make it go away. With a sound of pure fury, she snatched the envelope from Gail's hand and hurled it back into the apartment. "Get out." Gail nodded, unflappable. "You have been served. Have a good day." She turned and walked back toward the stairs, giving a subtle thumbs up to the camera she knew was there. Sasha stood in the doorway for a moment, trembling, before slamming the door so hard the camera feed vibrated. It was done. The legal machinery was now officially engaged. But Sasha's reaction told me she wasn't beaten. She was enraged. The text came 5 minutes later. "You think your little papers scare me? I'm not leaving. And now you've given me proof of your harassment for the police. Enjoy your last day of freedom." Marcus had warned me about this. The serving might trigger her final play. Be ready. I was ready. I had spent the previous night with Marcus, preparing a counter dossier. We had compiled everything: the timeline of her scam, the evidence of her pattern from Portland, with a written statement from her mother, which Carol Vance had emailed me, heartbroken but factual, the Instagram story, the utility dispute, the city violation. We had also prepared a sworn affidavit from me, detailing our agreement and her actions, and a statement from Marcus's organization attesting to the fraudulent use of tenant resources. We packaged it all in a PDF. The title: Dossier Re. Sasha Vance, Fraudulent Occupancy and Harassment Campaign. We had one target, the precinct that covered my building. I didn't wait for her to call. I walked into the precinct 30 minutes after she was served. I asked to speak to a detective about an ongoing fraud and harassment case. I was passed to a weary-looking detective named Alvarez. I laid it out calmly. I showed him the dossier on my tablet. I explained that I had served legal papers today to remove a fraudulent occupant, and that I had reason to believe she would shortly be filing a false police report against me in retaliation. I gave him Carol Vance's contact information. I showed him the hallway camera footage of the lock change. Detective Alvarez scanned the materials, his expression growing more interested. "You've done a lot of legwork. I'm trying to get my home back without wasting police resources," I said. "But if she files a false report, I want there to be a record that I came to you first with evidence of her pattern and motive." He took notes, took a copy of the dossier. "I can't promise anything, but this preempts a lot of drama. If she calls, we'll have this context. It doesn't mean we won't respond, but it means we'll respond informed." It was the best I could hope for. I left the precinct, feeling both lighter and more anxious. I'd fired my shot across the bow of the police. Now, I waited. The call to the police came at 4 p.m. I know because Detective Alvarez called me. "She just filed a report. Assault. Says you shoved her this morning when you came to the apartment." I was sitting in the library. I have hallway camera footage from this morning. I was never there. The process server, Gail, was. Her information is in the dossier. "I know," Alvarez said, a hint of tired amusement in his voice. "We pulled the report, saw your preemptive file. We're sending a unit to her location to take her statement. Standard procedure. But they'll be aware of the background." I thanked him and hung up. This was the moment. If her false accusation stuck, even for a day, it could derail everything. I pulled up the live feed from my hallway camera and waited. 20 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrived. They knocked. Sasha answered, now in full victim mode. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see her gestures, dramatic, tearful. She showed them her phone, probably my threatening texts. She pointed down the hall, where the camera was. Then, one of the officers said something, gesturing toward the new lock on the door.
Her posture changed.
Defensive. The officers were asking questions, not just taking a statement. They were challenging her narrative. Then, one officer pointed directly at my camera. I saw Sasha's face go pale. She hadn't noticed it. The officer said something else. She shook her head violently, started to argue. The officer's body language shifted from neutral to stern. The conversation lasted another 5 minutes. Sasha was no longer performing. She was pleading. The officers left. They didn't take her away, but they didn't offer comfort either. They walked out with the brisk efficiency of men who had just dealt with a time waster. 10 seconds after they disappeared down the stairs, Sasha's phone rang. She answered it, slumping against the doorframe. Even through the pixelated video, I could see her crumbling. It was her mother. Carol Vance had told me she would call after the police visit to beg her daughter to stop, to come home, to get help. That was the breaking point. The system, the police, the court, her own family, was no longer a tool or an audience for her performance. It was a unified front and it was closing in. Her threats had failed. Her lies had been preempted. Her sanctuary had become a panopticon, watched by me, by the city, by her own mother. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Sasha. No words. Just a photo. A key, sitting on my kitchen counter. Then another text. I'm gone by 8 p.m. Take your website down. And go to hell. I didn't reply. I just watched the camera. At 7:45 p.m., she emerged, dragging her 2 massive suitcases. She didn't look at the camera. She just left, disappearing down the stairwell, out of my building and hopefully out of my life. I waited an hour. Then, with a building super finally back from New Jersey and $50 richer for his emergency lock service, I stood in front of my apartment door. The new deadbolt was gone, replaced by my original lock. The super used his master key. The door swung open. The smell hit me first, stale takeout and perfume. My home was a war zone. Trash everywhere, my things piled in corners, her belongings finally gone. It was a hollow, messy victory. I had won. I had gotten my apartment back. But as I stepped over the threshold, I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhausted, violated, and painfully aware of the cost. So what now? The apartment is a wreck, my landlord still has me on thin ice, and Sasha is out there somewhere. Is the story over? Or is there one final, unexpected twist? Let me know what you think the cleanup and the consequences look like. The final part is about the aftermath and the price of winning a war you never wanted to fight.
Subscribe.
I spent 3 days cleaning. Not just the physical mess, the trash, the strange stains, the rearranged furniture, but the digital one. I took down the timeline website. I unfollowed and blocked Sasha on everything. I canceled the hallway camera. I wanted every trace of her erased from my life. My landlord, Metrostone, after a stern meeting and a $500 administrative fee, agreed not to terminate my lease, but place me on a zero-tolerance probation. I had my home back, but the silence felt different. The lock felt different. I had won, but the victory lived in my apartment like a ghost, whispering that my sanctuary could be stolen at any time. The first night back in my own bed, I didn't sleep. Every creak in the old building was an intruder. Every car door slamming outside was her returning. The psychological violation was deeper than the physical one. I'd outsmarted a scammer, but I'd been forced to become someone I didn't recognize, a strategist, a spy, a preemptive accuser at a police station. The person who trusted a friend in need was gone. In her place was someone who saw hooks in every favor, traps in every act of kindness. A week later, a padded envelope arrived with no return address. My stomach lurched. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was my camera lens, the one she'd borrowed. There was no note. It was both an apology and a final, petty power play. She could have trashed it, but she chose to remind me she'd had it all along. I threw the envelope away, but kept the lens. It felt like a trophy from a war I was ashamed to have fought. I threw myself into work, but my focus was shot. The freelance hotel gig that had started this nightmare had gone well, and the client recommended me for a bigger project, rebranding a boutique chain. It was the break I needed. But during the first presentation, when the client asked an unexpectedly aggressive question, I felt my palms sweat and my mind go blank. I saw Sasha's smirk. I wasn't in a boardroom. I was back in my living room, being gaslit. I stammered through the rest of the meeting. The client was polite but cool afterwards. My confidence, my professional self, had been collateral damage. This couldn't be the end of the story. I hadn't fought that hard just to live in fear in my own home. I needed to reclaim it, not just from her things, but from her memory. I decided to redecorate. Not just tidying, but a purge. I sold the couch she'd slept on. I repainted the wall she'd leaned against in her Instagram story. I rearranged everything until no footprint of her temporary kingdom remained. It was expensive and exhausting, but it felt like an exorcism. Then I did something for myself. I used a chunk of my savings to install a top-of-the-line, building-approved security system, a keypad lock with codes I could change from my phone, motion sensors, everything. It wasn't just about safety, it was about sovereignty. I controlled the access now. As the apartment started to feel like mine again, a strange thing happened. I began to get messages. Not from Sasha, but from strangers. A woman who'd found an archived version of my timeline website. A man who'd been through something similar with a subletter. They asked for advice. They shared their own stories of trust betrayed and homes hijacked. My private nightmare had resonated in a quiet, widespread community of people who'd been screwed over by friends, by partners, by professional tenants. One message stood out. It was from a reporter for a local digital news outlet that covered housing issues. She'd heard about the case through the grapevine, probably from Marcus at the Tenant Coalition. "Would you be willing to talk about your experience?" she asked. "Anonymously, if you prefer." It's a common scam that doesn't get much attention because victims are often too embarrassed or exhausted to talk. I was both of those things. But I also remembered the helplessness, the way the police had said civil matter, the way the system felt designed to protect the scammer. If my story could arm one person, make them check a lease, think twice about a casual favor, or just feel less alone, then maybe some good could come from the mess. I agreed to an interview on the condition of strict anonymity. My name changed, my building and neighborhood not specified. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything, from the 2 a.m. text to the process server. I sent her the redacted dossier. The article came out a week later with a headline, "The Friend Who Wouldn't Leave: How a Common Scam Exploits Trust and Tenant Laws." It was factual, chilling, and it included a sidebar with how to protect yourself tips, many of which I'd learned the hard way. The article got shared in neighborhood Facebook groups, on Reddit threads about landlord horror stories. People I knew sent it to me, saying, "This sounds like your nightmare." I just nodded and said, "Yeah, crazy, right?" The twist wasn't in getting revenge on Sasha. I have no idea where she went. Portland, maybe, or on to another city, another mark. The twist was in the aftermath. The article led to a local city council member's office reaching out to the reporter, then to Marcus's coalition, to discuss possible legislative fixes to make it slightly harder for professional squatters to establish tenancy so quickly. They were small, bureaucratic changes, but they were something. More personally, the act of telling my story, even anonymously, was cathartic. It transformed me from a victim into a witness, and then, inadvertently, into a minor advocate. I started volunteering a few hours a week with Marcus's coalition, helping other people navigate the early, panicky stages of similar situations. I used my design skills to make clearer infographics about tenant rights and scam warnings. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was a survivor with a very specific set of skills. I never got an apology from Sasha. I never got my security deposit back from MetroStone. I still double-check my locks every night. But the ghost in my apartment slowly faded. It was replaced by the quiet knowledge that I had been tested by fire and I hadn't burned. I'd learned to weld. The raw truth is this: you can do everything right, be kind, be smart, document things, and still get screwed by someone who has mastered the art of exploiting good faith. The victory isn't in avoiding the scam. Sometimes that's impossible. The victory is in how you fight your way out of it. I used the law, technology, social pressure, and sheer, stubborn refusal to be a victim. I changed the locks on my own life, metaphorically, and made sure I held the only key. So, did I change her life? Probably not for long. Grifters are resilient, but she undoubtedly changed mine. She forced me to see the vulnerabilities in my own kindness and to build stronger defenses, not just on my door but in my mind. The micro-niche here isn't just tenant revenge. It's about the profound violation of personal space and trust and the long, messy road to reclaiming your sense of safety and agency. Have you ever had your trust or your space violated by someone you let in? How did you reclaim your power? Or are you still dealing with the aftermath? Share your stories, the messy, the unresolved, the victorious, in the comments below. Let's turn our individual warnings into a collective defense. And if this story of a stolen apartment and a fought-for home hit a nerve, share it. Sometimes, the best protection is knowing you're not the only one who's had to change the locks. Thanks for listening.